Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. It's your host, Danny Dhaiphong. As you can see, I am joined by returning guest and friend of the show, Pepe Escobar from Moscow. Pepe, how are you doing?
Hi, everybody. Have a great late afternoon. It's 5:05 here.
Yes. Well, it's really good to be with you, Pepe. Once again,
Likewise.
we do have a lot to get to.
Of
Before
course.
we do, though, everyone, please do like the stream as you're coming in. That helps boost this in the algorithm, helps more people see what Pepe has to say. And then, of course, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Go to the video description to find Pepe Escobar's platforms, Twitter and Telegram. And, of course, you can support this channel here via all of the various options that you can find in the video description. But Pepe, we have some news to talk about, some geopolitical news. Let's start in the Middle East.
Oh,
So the
God.
Biden administration
Oh,
has
God. Not those
widened
gangsters again, please.
they've widened the war in the Middle East.
Oh,
What
God.
began, of course, as a U.S.-backed war of Israeli aggression in Gaza has ignited into what many feared would be a regional war. Now the Biden administration has announced there will be a weeks-long bombing campaign across quote-unquote Iranian targets in Syria and Iraq. And of course, you've been writing about the situation with regard to the Red Sea and Yemen, and Yemen's resistance through the blockade. The U.S. and these neocons seem entangled now in a broader war. Can you tell us the significance of this, especially in relation to the geoeconomic and geopolitical changes that have been occurring in the multipolar world? Because this feels like the neocons being dragged back into a historical kind of drudgery that was not predicted before, I guess, before October 8th.
Well, they are dragging themselves to what they do best, which is to launch unprovoked, absurd wars that they cannot win. And at the same time, there was a very, very subtle trap laid out by the axis of resistance. And the crash test dummy administration and the neocons fell right into this trap. It's beautiful. It's like it was a geopolitical reenactment of an Edgar Allan Poe short story, in fact. The most important thing is that whatever happens, even if they launch pinpointed attacks against the axis of resistance across the spectrum, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, especially. The axis of resistance has already made it very, very clear that they won't back down. On the contrary, they will increase their attacks, not only via Ansarullah, but also the militias in Iraq. It was very funny because one of the militias that's part of Hashd al-Shabi, Kataib Hezbollah, they said, now we're going to retreat a little bit because we're paying our respects to the government in Baghdad who wants to actually expel the Americans from our land. But this is a very, very clever PR operation as well, because they won't relent. In fact, they are going to redeploy along with other militias and along the core of the Hashd al-Shabi, the People's Mobilization Units, which, by the way, are linked to the Ministry of Defense in Iraq. So they are a semi-official or official body as well. So this so-called, for the moment, counterattack by the Biden administration against Iranian or Iranian-linked targets across the axis of resistance, they will be attacking the Iraqi government as well. Whatever they do in Iraq, they will be attacking Baghdad. And Baghdad not only tries to maintain a good relationship with the hegemon, but at the same time try to expel them from Iraq. So it's going to get incredibly more complicated than it already is. What happened with Yemen is absolutely outstanding. And this is something that anybody with an IQ over room temperature across the global south now understands the role of some sort of vanguard by Ansarullah, the Houthis Ansarullah, now in the big picture. One of the columns that I wrote recently, it was great because we used it in the title as well. The concept of Asabiyya. Asabiyya is a very, very important Arab word. Arabic has beautiful words that have many, many meanings. That's the case with Asabiyya. But the most important meaning of Asabiyya in terms of geopolitics, and that's why we used Yemen, Asabiyya, and geopolitics in the title. And people were attracted to it because you won't see that very often, right? I had to go back to Ibn Khaldun, one of the great Islamic scholars of all time. He conceptualized Asabiyya. It's basically, it's what the French would call esprit de corps. In English would be team spirit. And in fact, community spirit. The Chinese would interpret it as a community spirit, for instance. And like an overall idea that, to quote the great metaphysician, the Big Lebowski, ties the room together. So instead of a carpet tying the room together, we have the concept of Asabiyya. And this is exactly what the Houthis are applying. And that's why in the same article, I quoted an interview by the Yemeni prime minister when he was absolutely emphatic. He said, look, what we're doing is because of humanitarian, religious, and moral imperatives for us. The most extraordinary thing is that no other, apart from Hezbollah, of course, nobody else across the Arab world, not to mention governments, of course, and the rest of the world, nobody is doing as much in practical terms to defend the idea that our people, as they put it, our people between commas, they see the people in Gaza as our people, are being genocided, even with the ruling of the ICJ, who gave, in fact, another extra month for Israel to continue the genocide. And this was the reading of the people that I call the global cynic armada. They have a very, very good point. All of us analysts were trying to find the positives on the ICJ ruling. There are some positives, but in fact, they did the best that they could under the circumstances and under enormous pressure by the usual suspects. We all know that as well. But the differential offered by the Houthis and Ansarullah is that with one single stroke, and this is something that we already talked about before, and another analyst, of course, touched on this. It takes one single stroke to turn practically, half of the global commerce, trade, and interacting system upside down, and send them into total panic, and they don't know what to do. And we're not even talking about blocking the Strait of Hormuz, which would be much more important than blocking the Bab el-Mandeb and the Red Sea. So this is where we are at the moment. And what the other side, let's put it this way, has to offer, they could try to, okay, let's sit down on the same table, let's talk. This is called diplomacy, which is something that it doesn't exist in the Beltway, and obviously also doesn't exist in Brussels. As we are seeing nowadays, where, just as an aside illustration, which also illustrates what we're talking about, at the right moment where the European Union approves an extra 50 billion euro package over 4 years for Ukraine, you have the agricultural world from half of Europe, including Belgium, and this past week, especially in France, basically yelling. They said, look, we're not going to take it anymore. And obviously nobody is listening in Brussels. And in Paris, with the new Prime Minister, Guy Gabi, only 34, is Macron's mini-me, as we call him in Paris. And he appointed as foreign minister his former lover. So as you can see, everything is extremely meritocratic, isn't it? This is in one of the capitals of the world. So the dysfunction in the whole system, from what's going on in the US, which you know much better than I do, to what's happening in Western Europe and in Brussels, to what's happening in West Asia, it's evolving towards a perfect storm, which we still, none of us know where this could lead yet. To quote the Americans, the malign possibilities are endless. And obviously they will be initiated by Washington. There's no question about that. They could be thinking that, okay, if we launch a measured, targeted strike against the axis of resistance for a few weeks, we're going to solve this problem, which is completely absurd. They are falling into the trap of the Zionists in Tel Aviv and the Ziocons in Washington, the bomb Iran Beach Boys John McCain syndrome. We're back to where we were in 2005, 2006. I'm sure all of you remember, during the Cheney administration and with that lunatic Rumsfeld at the Pentagon. So in this sense, we are back. They are pushing for the Holy Grail from the beginning. You remember 7 countries in 5 years. We're back to 7 countries in 5 years, all over again. And it's really war of terror 3.0, 4.0, 5.0, right? And with an ongoing genocide to boot. So how can we keep, all of us analysts, how can we keep saying, looking around? You know, in my own particular case, I keep saying by coming here, Moscow, where I am. I left a country on the brink of civil war early this week in Paris, and I am back at the capital of the multipolar world, where they are deciding what? A possible future. I spent this whole week here in Moscow having meetings. I just came back from an ultra important meeting to talk to all of you. Today, I made a point to, I arrived 5 minutes before the beginning of our conversation, because I wanted to relate to you the importance of the sanity, people, what they are doing compared to the total insanity that all of us are immersed in. You know, so this, take this as a sort of introduction to our conversation.
Yes, well, it does feel like a redux of the war of terror, as you said. You have Lindsey Graham saying hit Iran hard. Of course, you have the Boltons of the world talking about war with Iran, and at the same time, you know, there are developments that kind of went more quietly as this strike on the CENTCOM base in Syria made the headlines. Iraq and Syria, of course, Syria has since the beginning been wanting U.S. troops and occupation forces out of its country. But Iraq has been talking about, Prime Minister Soudani has said that he would like U.S. forces to leave. What are the chances that this could happen? Because it sounds like what's going to happen in the coming weeks is that the United States is actually going to be striking Iraq. As you said, it's going to be bombing Syria because these so-called Iranian forces, they are being singled out within these countries, which both want the United States out. So what are the chances that the United States gets out under the conditions of a Biden administration, which is tangled up in multiple fronts, not only in West Asia, but around the world? It seems to be escalating toward a nightmare scenario for the United States and the hegemon.
Well, Danny, to unquote Bob Dylan, they are not tangled up in blue. They are tangled up in dark, dark gray, at least, or total darkness, in fact. Darkness darkness dawns at the break of noon. That's another Dylan. Well, the perspectives are not very, very good, to be extremely realistic. I haven't had time to discuss this with the Russians yet. It's too early, probably next week. And their position on West Asia as a whole is very, very complex. It's very sophisticated. In Israel, Gaza, they more or less hedge still, because the influence of Israel here in many different levels is enormous. At the same time, they are building more and more solid bridges with the whole of the lands of Islam, especially the Arabs, and especially the Arabs who are now part of BRICS 10. This was part of the serious conversations of BRICS Sherpas and Sue Sherpas beginning of the week here in Moscow. And it was with Sergei Ryabkov, the deputy foreign minister, which is an extremely able diplomat. And also Lavrov was involved as well. Then Lavrov talked about it. They didn't get into details. This is something that we're going to learn in the next few days. But decisions at the highest level with BRICS, Iran, and Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the Emirates, this is a key, absolutely key reorganization of everything that is happening and could happen across West Asia, because these are all very, very important players in the region. Saudi Arabia is a particularly complicated case, because now that they are part of BRICS, they see it in terms of, okay, now we are with Russia, and now we have OPEC plus, even stronger. And we have BRICS supporting what we do at OPEC plus, but it's not that automatic all the time. The Emirates, they have a very ambiguous position vis-a-vis the genocide in Gaza, which basically they don't say anything. Probably they'll be too embarrassed if they actually said what they really think about it. They only think in terms of future deals with Israel as part of the IMEC, that famous connectivity corridor, which maybe will never happen, right? And of course, the key of the whole thing is Russia, China, and Iran, which their decisions, the trilateral decisions in their interconnected strategic partnerships, now they're going to extrapolate, and they're also going to include BRICS. So this means that a discussion that one of the discussions that I was having in my lunch today, only a few hours ago, the possibility that it's an almost certain possibility. Obviously, we cannot prove it with a smoking gun, because nobody on the record will confirm it, that what Yemen is doing has the full backup of Russia, China, and Iran. And this is already a mega, mega, mega game changer. All right. Relationship between China and Israel. Okay, they have a relationship in trade, intelligence, security, etc. But now the Chinese diplomacy now is saying out loud for the whole planet to listen, the necessity of start discussions on a sovereign Palestinian state. And that's extremely affirmative. And from the point of view of Chinese diplomacy, when things like that come, you have to pay attention, because they are never so affirmative, you know. And the Lebanese factor, very, very important. Because Israel is they're getting their asses kicked in Gaza in many different levels. The only thing that the IDF knows, and all of you know, and everybody knows, and the whole global south knows, is to kill women and children. As a fighting force, they are pathetic. And every good military analyst is going to tell you the same thing. If you ask Scott about that, if you ask Martianov about that, they're going to tell you the same thing. Everybody knows that. So killing women and children is very, very easy. Try fighting hardcore Hezbollah operatives in southern Lebanon, where they live, in their villages, where their weapons are, and they are defending their land. They're going to get their ass triple kicked. But still, they want to change the narrative. And that's what we're getting this past few weeks, etc. Okay, we're gonna go there. You're gonna have to retreat 50 kilometers up north, up to the Litani River, and that's it. And this is gonna be our land, theirs, right? It's not gonna happen. Everybody knows that, and everybody knows that when Nasrallah is a very, very measured, character. And that's why he's respected by the Arab street, Sunni or Shiites, all over the Arab world. He only says the essentials. He never threatens to do anything. And when they act with extreme, really resolutely, And this is what's going to happen if they are attacked, and if they are attacked by the IDF in southern Lebanon. Once again, changing the narrative. So everybody's trying to change the narrative. The Israelis are trying to change the narrative from their failure in Gaza to Lebanon. The neocons are trying to change the narrative from the whole failure, in fact, their whole failure in the whole region to bomb Iran back to 2005, 2006. And obviously, Russia, China, and Iran, looking at all that, they said, okay, why don't we extend the trap a little bit more? Sooner or later, this thing is going to snap. We don't know how it's going to snap and which way it's going to snap. And this accounts for the militias being bolder in their attacks against US bases. And I would say the great interrogation point of the famous drone that caused so much disaster at Tower 22 base, which is a mini base in the middle of nowhere in the Jordanian-Syrian border, and 30 kilometers more or less away from Al-Tanf, which is the mega American base inside occupied Syrian territory. It's something that obviously we won't get a confirmation from the Ministry of Defense here or from the Ministry of Defense in Tehran. But what's circulating in the corridors is something absolutely fascinating, that essentially the Iraqis or the Iranians passed to the Iraqis, cracked the code of the American air defenses in Iraq and in Syria, the CRAM thing. So if this is true, wow, then we're talking about a tremendous practical game changer, because this will open the road for all these militias to start attacking all those American bases en masse, and not only the bases in Iraq and Syria. This could extrapolate to Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, everywhere. So this is one of the interrogation points in the air now. As soon as we have some sort of even indirect confirmation that that's the case, then it's game on. I would say that the game is already on, because the success, let's put it this way, of this attack on Tower 22 proves that, yes, they can do it. Mm-hmm. And they found a way to do it. Remember that before that, they tried, 100, 120, 150 times to attack those American bases unsuccessfully. And this one worked. Yeah. So, okay, go ahead, Danny.
No, I was going to say the interesting strategy, there have been videos circulating of Yemen's Ansar Allah forces in a rally, literally chanting,
1 million people.
Let's make this a world war. We're not afraid.
Exactly.
Let's make this a world war. And it seems like the axis of resistance, you said a trap. It does seem like that's what this is. It's a very careful and measured strategy of dragging the United States, dragging Israel, dragging all of the forces that support them into a kind of a slog of a war. And one thing that I've heard, and I want you to react to this, is some have said that, well, the activity, let's say if there was some kind of Al-Aqsa triangle, or the activity of the strategy of blockading Strait of Hormuz, Suez Canal, all of the, Bab el-Mandeb, will actually in the long term hurt Russia and China more, because they depend more on that kind of trade in Asia. But we have seen Russia and China have not been targeted in this very particular blockade that Yemen's forces, that Ansar Allah has enacted. So react to that. React to the long-term strategy, how this would affect, and how this strategy does have it seems like a very clear target, which is the United States, the hegemon. And at the same time, you've said that Russia and China, especially Russia, have been actually supporting these measures in many respects. So could you elaborate on that in the context of this? I've heard it being talked about that Russia and China long term might actually be affected negatively.
I answered your question in my introduction, more or less. In fact, the fact that this is happening and Russia and China are not saying absolutely anything against it, I would say it's more than conclusive proof that there has been some serious back in the room dialogue. There's no question about that. And China know that they could lose a little bit in terms of, but their ships are not being targeted. Russian ships are not being targeted. Iranian ships are not being targeted. And from the beginning, Ansarullah, they were extremely careful to circumscribe their actions. This is only Israeli ships or ships who are delivering anything, whatever, cargo, merchandise, oil, gas, etc., to Israel. And then after the so-called declaration of war by USUK, United States, United Kingdom, they said, okay, so your ships are also targets. Of course, you declare war. Basically, you declare war against us. We didn't declare war against you. We declared war against Israel. And in fact, we did not declare war against Israel. We implemented something to wake up the rest of the world to what Israel is doing, because of what we explained in our introduction, those humanitarian, religious, and moral values. So Russia and China and the BRICS, they are a sort of, I would say, a combo in the background, giving a sort of nearly invisible moral support to what the Houthis are doing out of moral support for Gaza. So this is a way, for instance, for the Chinese, which don't want to get involved deeply in anything in West Asia, apart from trade deals, to make their position, in fact, quite explicit. And at the same time, like we commented, starting to ask for serious negotiations towards a sovereign Palestinian state. And the Russian position, everybody knows, is way more complicated. But at the same time, it amounts to their, let's say, hidden ghost support to Yemen amounts to the same thing. And the rest of, and in terms of public opinion, is amazing. Virtually the whole global south is behind Yemen. And people are stunned that a country that was bombed for 7 years nonstop by a coalition where the US was leading from behind. Don't forget that. It was Saudi Arabia and the Emirates in the beginning. Then the Emirates left because they knew that this was going nowhere. So basically it was a coalition of Saudi Arabia and, with, of course, American weapons and American support from behind. And Houthis, they survived everything. And when there was the 2022 ceasefire, was in fact a Houthi victory in practice. And obviously, those with a brain in Riyadh, they can pick up the phone and call Washington and say, look, don't mess with these guys. You have no idea who you're messing with. And obviously, nobody in Washington has any idea of what the Houthis are about. Not those people at the State Department, certainly not. Maybe a few CIA specialists, but they are not being listened to. And obviously, the old guard CIA, they know very well how tough the Yemenis are. But it's a circle of viciousness and incompetence, in fact, and it links to, for instance, it links to two of the most important books of the year who happen to have been published these past few days. In fact, one of them is going to come out in 2 weeks, and the other one came out 2 weeks ago. Emmanuel Todd's book about the defeat of the West, and Glenn Dissen's book about the possibility of a future Westphalian system, but a real Westphalian system, a new world order based on Eurasia. His book is coming out in 2 weeks. And if you read these books together, which is something that I did, I read, and then I wrote about both with an interval of 2 weeks, but I read them in sequence. And they basically are from two, very interesting, two European intellectuals, one French, one Scandinavian. Basically, Glenn in Norway, he's considered a Putinista, cancel culture, you name it. And Todd, because he has this enormously important background as a historian, as an anthropologist, as a demographer, as a sociologist, as a political analyst, etc., they cannot touch him, and discredit him. But he was ignored by most of the mainstream media. In fact, the mainstream media ignored him. Alternative or semi-alternative media, of course, radio in France, he became a superstar again, etc. And they're saying the same thing. They're explaining why the West, as the collective West, failed in the Ukraine project. They explain this in terms of not only a cognitive dissonance, but in the way Todd organizes his book is even more important because it has to do with education, falling of standards of education, and of course, neoliberalism predominating over everything, and the basis of what we now have as a sort of liberal totalitarianism and cancel culture. He studies that very well in the book as well, even if the book is not about that, but you need that for context. And Glenn Deason focuses more on all the backstories leading to the special military operation, which is going to be 2 years old soon, right? And when we look at the overall reasons of why the West is failing, it comes back to the same basic set of reasons. Falling of the standards of education, what happened after the end of the Soviet Union, where the Americans believed themselves that they were the winners with unrestricted powers, and it was the beginning of a new era of another American century with no competitors, and they more or less assumed that their mission, a Mackinder-esque mission of preventing the emergence of one or two peer competitors in Eurasia, was fulfilled because China was still developing and Russia was destroyed. Post-Soviet Union, Russia was destroyed. So we had this interregnum. Then we had the war on terror, which was a war out of nothing to the benefit only of this Ziocon brigade, which they lost, by the way, including in Iraq. And now finally we have, I would say, political realism is back when we see two big powers, resurgent big powers, united in a strategic partnership and telling the hegemon, look, your free lunch is over. We're starting a new thing now, and we have the whole global south behind us. So how can you expect the people who really run the show in DC to accept that? They won't. And that's the problem for all of us, because we know what we're dealing with is explosive in terms of they are going to cause a big explosion because they cannot handle reality, pure and simple. And reality now is strike them in the face in terms of all those failures from everywhere, from West Asia to the rest of Eurasia as a whole, especially, their failure in Africa. Since the end of colonialism, since the beginning of post-colonialism, which was never really post-colonialism, because if you look at Western Africa, it continued to be colonized by France, and it still is. This is a new process that has just started, and the same in Latin America. And in Latin America, obviously, they always have their favorite fifth columnists, which is the case of the Argentinian chainsaw massacre now, which is perfect. The guy's from central casting in terms of having a fifth columnist to destroy Argentina from the inside, Brazil-Argentina relations, Argentina-China relations, and intra-BRICS relations. It's perfect. This morning I was watching his interview to the Wall Street Journal. And the editor of the Wall Street Journal, she was having an orgasm interviewing Milei. He was perfect. Every perfect sound bite, one after another in Spanish. It was a good thing that at least she spoke decent Spanish. She interviewed him in Spanish. So he felt a little more comfortable. So it was one sound bite after another. Can you, Wall Street Journal, obviously, can you imagine? You know, that there were Dom Perignon all over the newsroom with something like this.
Yeah.
So it's very easy for the empire in Latin America. In Africa, not anymore. And in Eurasia, forget it. Because they are being contested from West Asia to East Asia to Northeast Asia, our friends from the DPRK. Now, even more closely linked with Russia and China. So now we have a real axis of evil, Russia, China, DPRK, right? So no wonder they're freaking out, Danny. No wonder. But when you discuss this with Russians, which are, as you know, very, very realistic and extremely precise, they think mathematically in terms. They say, no, they're going to keep postponing this thing because they always come up with a diversion. And then they turn global public opinion's attention, for instance, to one of their own diversions. So this thing keeps rolling on, even though their power is being undermined little by little. But this could go on for decades, at least. It's true.
Yeah. I mean, the regression that we're seeing, I mean, it really is a regression. You know, the United States, the neocons, the zyocons, they had all these plans to move to the bigger fish, to move to the great powers, Russia and China. Now they find themselves back in West Asia in a scenario that seems, you know, just untenable. And how much does this have to do with, I'm wondering, the fact that you have this massive defeat in Ukraine, which is a huge blow to the encirclement and containment and destabilization agenda against Russia. You also have had the Biden administration, the United States and Europe all have to do many circles around China, from aggression, then rolling back, then playing at diplomacy. So how much of this is almost, you say, they're going crazy, but how much does it have to do with the fact that, West Asia, of course, is very strategic, and whether it was the war on Syria or all of the provocations with Iran over the many years, we've known that the greater road is to Moscow and Beijing, that's where the neocons want to take it. But at the same time, by regressing backwards, how much of this is an acknowledgement that, well, there really is no other option? Because I think the United States knows pretty well, given its very contradictory rhetoric, that Russia kicked their butts in Syria, that they were basically forced to roll back their destabilization and regime change effort in Syria. It's not going to go any better in a road to Iran. It's going to go much, much worse. So they know this, but yet they're back. So how much of this has to do with conceding that at this moment, Russia and China are untouchable in many ways?
That's the problem. They grudgingly have to admit that they cannot do absolutely anything to contain the ascension of China, the strategic partnership, Russia-China strategic partnership, the fact they are both coordinating the expansion of BRICS, the fact that sooner rather than later, and sooner means this year, 2024, the year of the great decision. In fact, we're going to start having practical mechanisms that will accelerate de-dollarization. This was the key theme of my dinner last night and my lunch today. We were discussing that. I cannot publish anything at the moment. It's confidential, but you're going to hear some very, very important things happening in the next few months. So this means it's accelerating, I would say, relatively fast. I talked about some of these things with Michael Hudson, and is that Michael? So it's confidential. Michael, he won't be publishing anything for the moment about that. And as soon as we have, let's say, a roadmap of what's going to happen in the next few months, especially before the BRICS summit in Kazan in October. And then Michael is going to be one of the key guys who's going to get on board and probably explain, especially for an American audience, what's in the works. It's fascinating. Technically, it's a bit complicated, especially to explain in layman terms. In fact, I am being briefed. I am learning from these guys, And of course, as soon as we have direct Russian endorsement, so this means the Russian government will be behind what's going to happen next. This means that sooner or later the Chinese government will be behind that, and the other BRICS. And this is the idea, to have this ball rolling before the summit in October. And it's very interesting because these negotiations on de-dollarization, they were much more advanced within the Eurasia Economic Union, with our friend Glaziev, who is the minister in charge of the macroeconomics of the Eurasia Economic Union. But now, because of BRICS, the Russians, okay, no, this is our presidency of BRICS this year. We need to come up with something very solid and very fast to show to the partners and to show to the global South as a whole. So that's an extra incentive. Early this week here, we had the first meeting of the BRICS Sherpas and Sous Sherpas. The guys who prepare everything, and they have to discuss everything. So it's good. Ryabkov, the deputy foreign minister, was there. He's the point man in Russia, coordinating all that. Lavrov went there. Lavrov then talked about it. So okay, everybody's very optimistic. But don't forget, it's very complicated. You're going to have to, on the same table and with the same policies, you have to satisfy the Indians, the Brazilians, Saudi Arabia. It's very, very, Iran, it's very, very complicated. But they're up to the challenge. They're up to the challenge because when they look at the geopolitical map and the incandescent possibilities that certainly the hegemon are going to pick up to, basically the number one agenda is set fire to West Asia. We discussed that in our previous podcasts. Why? Because West Asia is essential for the Belt and Road Initiative. West Asia is essential for the overarching Chinese idea. And it's essential in terms of unifying West Asia, unifying some of the most important lands of Islam, means these lands of Islam doing more trade with other parts of the world, not only Eurasia, but the other parts of the world as well. So what is the hegemon? The hegemon is based on divide and rule, as all of you know. What's plan A with no plan B? Let's set fire to West Asia, which is exactly what's happening now, right? As the previous set fire to is, okay, how do we set fire to Russia? Okay, we set fire in Ukraine, and the fire in Ukraine is going to contaminate Russia. We all know where's this going at the moment, right? So, they're specialists in failed wars because it's the only, as the empire of forever wars, is the only thing that they know how to do. The problem now is we are dealing with an absolutely out of control vessel, the aircraft carrier in Israel. And they have their own agenda, which is not the agenda of those different silos in Washington. No, it's the agenda of those from that special tribe or tribes who believe that they run the world. And that's why it gets so much more complicated. These are the only people who can relaunch a failed war on terror and get away with it. Nobody's going to say, this is absurd. Only us, independents. But this is our job. We have to do that. But the system the system that still runs geoeconomics and geopolitics around the world, most of it, they say, oh, okay, no problem. After all, these people control the system as well. And that's what's so complicated. It's much more complicated now. If we thought that we had a complicated geopolitical situation in 2001, post 9/11, no, now it's the real deal. Because now it's an accumulation of failures. Now it's the cosmic humiliation of NATO as a whole in Ukraine, which they can't disguise by any means that they think, it's going to have a ceasefire, we're going to fire Zaluzhny. Who cares? These are details. The most important thing is you cannot escape your cosmic humiliation, period. And the whole planet is watching. And now, with set fire in West Asia, really going on a set fire mood all over the place, that's how we are. We are really now we are totally under the volcano. There's no question about that. Unfortunately, I wish I could be more optimistic to all of you guys.
Yeah. Well, the timing of all of this, this regression, this descent into another major quagmire in West Asia is very interesting, given the headway Russia and China have made in West Asia, the various developments around BRICS that you mentioned, around diplomacy, around the fact that West Asia, for for so many years, has been divided and conquered, and over the last several years, it's been a very rapid change. It seems like over the last half decade alone, we've seen many, many, many years more worth of progress toward a more united West Asia, integrated West Asia with the multipolar world. So it's very interesting that now we have the out of control, given that both U.S. and Israeli foreign policy are completely aligned in the divide and conquer Balkanization strategy. It's very interesting that they both are playing kind of their own forms of escalating this kind of war.
Yeah.
But perhaps we can, unless you want to closing comments on that.
No, I would strongly recommend all of you, if possible. Of course, reading for an English-speaking audience, reading in French is complicated. But with help of a Yandex or a DeepL or any good translation mechanism, try to read at least the basic points. I outlined the basic points of Emmanuel Todd's book, and you can try to go further by trying to read in translation some parts of some sections of his book. And Glenn Deason's book, I strongly recommend it. If you want to have the full background of the Ukraine war, you can say that he started in the 19th century, in fact. It's excellent. There's a stretch that is beautiful when he talks about the Eurasianists in the 1920s. And they were already thinking about multipolarity. Fascinating. There's another thing that he dug up, a quote from the selected words of Deng Xiaoping, which is absolutely extraordinary. You're going to see that in the column. I reproduced it verbatim. It's something that Deng said in 1990. That is, even before he went on that famous tour in southern China, where this was the big boost for China to start growing 10%, 12, 14% a year. And Deng was talking about multipolarity in 1990. No wonder. Well, I consider him the most important political figure of the 20th century. And many people would agree. No wonder. He was a real visionary. And in fact, he had the vision of how to turn China into I would say, a moderate, wealthy country, but at the same time, the number one trade and economic power in the world. It's all due to Deng. And it's great that Glenn revived a little bit of the importance of Deng. So these are two details, literary related, let's put it this way. The other thing is keep a very, very close eye to what the BRICS are going to do throughout this year. because it's something that we discussed here at the end of last year. Like, look, guys, you have 1 year you have one shot and 1 year to do it. If you blow it, we're all fucked, all of us. And obviously, the Russians totally understand that, And we're going to see, especially after the elections, next month are the elections here. Vladimir, of course, is going to be reelected. So there's going to be there's going to be some key changes in key posts, including the Russian foreign ministry. We still don't know who's going to be the next one. Could be some changes in the Ministry of Defense as well. And obviously, they will want to speed up everything in Ukraine. Don't forget that there is an on-the-record promise by Shoigu made a few months ago that the SMO is going to finish in 2025. So he already gave a date. So they have to, there's a lot of mopping up to do in 2024, right? And this is something that we're going to learn in the next few weeks. It's great. I'm going to be here for 2 months, so we're going to have a lot of stuff here from the lion's mouth in the next few weeks, right? These next few weeks are very, very important. There's a multipolar conference at the end of February. There's the elections in March, and then we can expect the BRICS train leading to the summit in October to pick up a lot of speed. So in terms of having a more realistic and let's say slightly more auspicious outlook for the future, this is where it's happening, and in sharp contrast to the under the volcano situation in West Asia.
Yeah, well, perhaps we can talk a little bit about the Ukraine situation then. You're in Russia. The latest in Ukraine is very bleak. I think Shoigu just came out with numbers: 23,000 Ukrainian troops killed in lower intensity fighting, mind you, since the counteroffensive. So Ukraine has lost 23,000, and of course there have been the revelations, or should we even call them that, of U.S. missiles being used to kill Ukrainian POWs. A very dark and
apparently
and
it's
story.
fully established, Danny. It was a Patriot, fully established.
Yeah, fully established.
We had confirmation, and even Putin said on the record.
Yeah. So I mean, that's a very twisted, as well as of course dangerous story. So what's the mood in Russia? And you said that the conflict, Russia has stated that the conflict will end by 2025 or in 2025.
It's what Shoigu said. It's not us. It's what Shoigu said on the record. So everybody can go to the record and say, look, what about your promise here?
So what's your assessment on where that is at? Well in the way?
Then it's too early. I prefer to, in our next podcast, I don't know when it's going to be. Then it's too. I arrived here 4 days ago. It's not long enough. What I can say is that I'll be around a little bit, if you know what I mean. Right. So I'll be able to see in detail the mood, and the mood not only in Moscow. Moscow is very, very peculiar. Here, it's something that many of you know. The war here is invisible. You see the odd Z sign in a few boulevards. You see, you don't even see the ribbon of St. George very often. So the war is 1,000 kilometers away. So it's very, very far away. And don't forget, Moscow is a very liberal city, essentially. All the remaining liberals or pro-liberals or totalitarian liberals, let's put it this way, they live here or in St. Petersburg. So if you go to one of those wonderful restaurants at night and you listen a little bit to the conversations, there are a lot of skeptics towards the SMO. There are a lot of people who actually don't like it, a lot of people who still don't understand it, and a lot of people who want it to end tomorrow. But these obviously are the ones who want to go shopping in the French Riviera. It's a tiny minority. But there are a lot of young liberal professionals who are not totally on board with the reasons given by the Kremlin and the system for the war in Ukraine. So there are different levels of Russia. And of course, don't forget, there are a lot of fifth columnists still active here in Moscow, especially. So it's complicated. But when you go to other parts of Russia, you get a much, in fact, you get an unfiltered vision from the Russian middle class and from the Russian working classes about what's going on in Ukraine. And obviously, they are more conservative. They are more patriotic. No question about that. They understand that there's an enormous effort, which includes lots of soldiers being killed as well. You have the families. The famous saying here in Moscow is that Putin is more afraid of the mothers of those soldiers killed in Donbass than the Ukrainian army, which is true, which is absolutely true. Even though you don't feel that you are in a country in a militarized state or in a state of war. No, the economy in Russia, great parts of the economy is militarized in a sense that we are at war and we need maximum production, so not only in terms of weapons but hardware, etc. At the same time, effects of sanctions, you don't see any. You go to some of the best supermarkets in Europe here, most of the best supermarkets here in France, come on, it's a joke compared, really, and the quality of the offer and the variety of the offer as well. You feel that you are in an Asian supermarket in Bangkok or in Singapore, So there is this dichotomy. So you have a better appreciation of what the war means to Russia when you leave Moscow and St. Petersburg.
Russia has become the biggest economy in Europe. That's one of the bigger stories, I believe,
PPP,
of
yes,
yeah,
enormous.
by purchasing
By
power
PPP,
parity terms.
yeah.
And that seems to be one of the big stories coming into this new year. Wages are up in Russia. Russia's growing at a rate 2-3 times more than most of its European counterparts, leveling the sanctions. And now you have in Ukraine, you made a brief reference to this earlier. Zaluzhny is about to be sacked, or there's all kinds of back and forth about that. But there's also just growing admissions that the West cannot be relied upon for support, or at least decisive support, if there ever was such a thing, any longer. So this seems like a clear trajectory toward Russian victory. Now, if you could just be, given that you've been to Russia so many times and you have been studying this for quite a long time, can you just illuminate viewers of how Russia got here?
Got here in which level would you prefer?
At all levels. How did it get to this point of a clear trajectory toward victory, which includes also the little often stated fact that Russia is now the biggest economy in Europe, meaning that it is essentially the superpower in the region at this moment?
There are many. There are a few characters, Danny, that we could single out as the people really responsible for the success. Incredibly as it might seem, even though I share Glaziev's restrictions, we have to say that Elvira Nabiullina, the head of the Russian Central Bank, is one of these characters. She steered the Russian economy through the most ultra hardcore sanctions ever. Everything was thrown against Russia. Russia absorbed it, and okay, we're going to do import substitution. We're going to reorganize our agriculture. We're going to reorganize the way we consume. We're going to find new partners, trade and commerce across the global south, and forget about Europe, etc. So, and at the same time, they learn from the mistakes on the ground in Ukraine. And they're still learning, and they are still making a lot of mistakes. These are the mistakes that you see pointed out by some of the best Russian military correspondents on the terrain, independent. They do not follow the Kremlin. They are really independent. And they point out in detail, okay, why do we have to be bombed here and there when we could have found a solution? Why it's still, even if we are advancing Nadvika and Donetsk continues to be shelled every day. These, examples, why the Russian Black Sea Fleet is not totally protected in Sebastopol. So these are very, very serious questions. And these guys, at least they are posing these questions. And the Russians are learning from their mistakes. They learned from battle strategy. They developed a drone, an absolutely formidable drone industry, which they did not have 2 years ago. There's still, the discussion continues on the first few weeks of the SMO. Because the original idea, and this is more than established, was, okay, we go in a blitzkrieg for all practical purposes. We get near to Kiev. There's going to be a military coup, and then we negotiate with the new leaders. It didn't happen. A serious problem is nobody took the blame for this, I would say, flawed information that they passed all the way to the Kremlin. This is very, very serious. It could have been the FSB, but I doubt it. More likely the SVR, the Russian Foreign Intel. So this means Narishkin should have known better, and he didn't. But these, but this is intrigues higher up, in the higher up echelons, and we'll never know how they're going to solve it. For instance, the Prigozhin case was solved in a way that was the best way for everybody. He disappeared, right? You cannot do this with very well-positioned people in the Ministry of Defense, in the FSB, in the SVR, in the GRU, etc. But in the end, I would say, to answer your question in broader terms, it was a combination of extremely efficient policies by the Russian central bank and Russia learning on the terrain in Ukraine how to organize this combined arms operation, like our friend Martyanov describes it very, very well. How fast they went through import substitution and diversifying their imports and exports with new clients, especially all over Eurasia, including Southeast Asia as well. And of course, the leader. No? If you have a leader like, unfortunately, in our good old United States of America, you see what happens. If you have a guy like Vladimir Putin, it's a completely different ballgame. And that's it. And even the adversaries are forced to recognize it, And the National Security Council here, they are very competent. Patrushev is extremely competent. Medvedev himself turned into a hawk. He's also very competent.
Yeah, I've been actually shocked by that to some degree.
Reading
his telegram, it's a far cry
totally
from
unplugged, totally
2012,
unplugged.
right?
Medvedev totally unplugged, exactly.
Right.
So you see that you see a leadership that is and very, very important. They are thinking in terms of the benefit of the country. In fact, there's very little corruption in the higher spheres. The Ministry of Defense is very complicated. The Ministry of Defense is a black box, and for us foreigners, it's impossible. Even my Russian friends here say, "Look, nobody really knows what goes on inside the Russian Ministry of Defense." It's a very, very complex issue. But overall, the way they steered the fact that the collective West threw them against them, everything, the kitchen sink, you name it, thousands of aircraft carriers with kitchen sinks, And the Russian submarine kept on going. And very, very important, and this is also a very, very important point, the overwhelming majority of the global South understood what was happening to Russia. They also understood that what was happening with a first-class military nuclear power could also happen to any one of them. They understood from the beginning when you have the hegemon basically stealing $300 billion of Russian assets, they can do this with anybody on the planet in a flash. So everything that happened accelerated what 2 years ago roughly was still incipient, which was the formation of the solid nodes of multipolarity all over. So this, what happened to Russia reinforced the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, reinforced the Belt and Road Initiative in China, which was proved by the summit last year, 10 years of Belt and Road, reinforced the Eurasia Economic Union. They're making extra deals with other partners. They made a deal with Iran, they made a deal with Vietnam, they're going to make a deal sooner or later with Indonesia. Reinforced the Russia-China strategic partnership, especially, and most of all, reinforced BRICS. So the war in Ukraine was the one of the key, I would say, detonators of expanded BRICS. No wonder you have 34 countries officially in the queue, plus everybody else. I say, oh, we also want it. How do you do it, etc. That's it, and that's why a few of us are qualifying 2024 as the year of the great decision, because you have all the elements together. You have the Russian presidency. You have 1 year to come up with practical solutions to practical issues like trading in your own currencies, multilateral trading, de-dollarization, etc. Expansion of ties in different nodes of the planet, different blocks inside BRICS, which is an idea that was first, the first guy who had this idea was Yaroslav Lisovolik. At the time, Yaroslav was with the Valdai. And I remember meeting him here in 2018. He explained to me in detail his idea of expanded BRICS, BRICS Plus. And in fact, what happened basically was a development of his own idea. The difference was his idea was we should start having these subgroups within BRICS start talking to each other. Example, you have Mercosur talking to ASEAN, But sooner or later, we're going to have the same thing. We're going to have Brazil from Mercosur, and from ASEAN, soon we could have Indonesia as part of BRICS. So this dialogue happens, all right. So we already have, for instance, the Gulf Cooperation Council, Saudi Arabia and the Emirates talking to the members of other regional groups as well. So this is already ongoing, So this was the number one geopolitical and geoeconomic result of the war in Ukraine and the way Russia handled the whole thing. The rational and practical possibilities of this expansion of multipolarity, but now based on multilateral organizations and with practical policies, which is what the BRICS are going to try to implement this year. So that's the game changer, in fact.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier Putin's leadership versus Biden's leadership. I mean, we do have this leadership crisis that seems to be swirling, not in the entire collective West, but it's most prominent in its puppet project, Ukraine. Now everything is in disarray. Zelensky is, about to can Zaluzhny, or maybe not. We don't know, but there's obvious disarray inside of Ukraine, and the Biden administration is just absolutely in tatters in terms of its popularity in the U.S., its global standing. The U.S. in general has never been lower.
Never been lower.
But people in the West don't understand Vladimir Putin. They don't understand the leadership of Russia. Maybe you could close on the Ukraine-Russia segment on helping people understand why Vladimir Putin's leadership was so critical. Like, what is it about Putin, Russian leadership at this moment that made Russia up to the task of standing tall amid these, what in any other period would have been seen as formidable, if not just absolutely terrifying odds?
Mm-hmm. The problem is that, Danny, the 24/7 non-stop brainwashing across NATO stand is absolutely brutal. I think I mentioned to all of you guys before, for instance, when I'm in Paris, I hold up in my home. I have nobody to talk to, literally. My best friends deserted me because of course, they know what I think, they read what I write, and it's for them it's absolutely impossible to understand, because these are intelligent people. Well, including some of my friends who work at the European Commission, but that's even worse. These people actually redact sanctions against Russia, so they will never understand a free dialogue with somebody who tries to understand what Russia is doing, which is the case of our case as analysts, in fact. So I have been accused on and on and on and on of being a Putinista paid by the Kremlin, the same shit. When at the time during the war on terror, I was accused of being pro-Al Qaeda. And this, with many analysts, friends of mine, is absolutely the same thing when we are in the West. And that's why we're fed up. That's why we're here. That's why we go to Asia, where you can have, or to South America, where you can have an actual decent conversation, civilized education with different points of view, where divergence is normal, but people don't take it personally, or they try to cancel you, which is the case now in Europe. Just an extra example for you guys. Todd was a miracle. One of the smaller public channels, TV channels, TV5, TV5, which is broadcast all over the world. They invited him for an interview. His interview broke all records, more than 1 million views and all that. And in his interview, he was forced to tell his audience, please stop bullshitting about Putin. Pay attention to what he's saying, what he's doing. Pay attention to what's happening inside Russia, because it's absolutely impossible. If you live in England, in France, in Italy, in Spain, etc., you turn on the 8 o'clock news at night, it's basically rabid Russophobia, one day after another. Same with mainstream media. And if you read mainstream media that used to be at least relatively decent in the past, like The Economist or the Financial Times, it's even worse, in fact, because it's Russophobia plus non-stop warmongering. So no wonder you see well-educated liberal professionals across the West basically regurgitating what comes over here 24/7. It's absolutely brutal. For instance, Glenn Deason, who wrote this excellent book on Eurasia and on the war in Ukraine, he has a tough time in Norway, especially because before that he had a stint here at the Higher School of Economics. He was working very close to Sergei Karaganov. So when he went back to Norway and he starts publishing, oh my God, they went after him, they went after his family, and all. He even started considering moving out of Norway. He didn't, because the university where he teaches, University of South Norway, is relatively progressive. So they didn't try to cancel him, at least, But this happens with, the best Italian analysts and historians or political scientists, they are marginalized. They simply cannot be published on mainstream Italian media. They publish on small Telegram channels or websites, etc. So it's relentless. It's relentless. When you are in Europe, you feel that you are in the middle of oligarchic totalitarianism completely. In fact, this is Todd's expression, in fact, was oligarchic liberalism. I prefer to use totalitarian liberalism because it is totalitarian. If you don't toe the line, they will do everything to cancel you. There's absolutely no question about that. And even if you are, in the case of Todd, an extremely respected intellectual, they only had to talk about, and most of the mainstream media didn't. In fact, for instance, Le Monde, they gave the review of Todd's book to an absolute idiot. And in the title of the review was already editorializing. The title, you had the word conspiracy, and you had, between commas, Russian propaganda. It's already in the title. And this was a newspaper that used to be the newspaper of record in the West in the 70s, Le Monde. And now is a sub-gutter rag, in fact. So it's very hard then. It's very hard to go against it. Very, very hard. And across the global south, at least, you can, it's fantastic. You will Cuban media, Nicaraguan media, Chilean media, for that matter. And you have absolutely first-class analysis. In Southeast Asia, the same thing. In Indonesia, fantastic, absolutely fantastic. So you have to leave the West to have a civilized conversation nowadays. Who would have thought, right?
Yeah, who would have thought? Now, lastly, I like your comments on a emerging story, in this, and we'll close with China. So, according to Reuters, the United States has been creating a secret stash of sorts of military armaments in Australia, using military operations and war games with Australia to ostensibly prepare for war with China, vis-a-vis Taiwan. Now, of course, the news lately with regard to China has been collapse. China's economy is collapsing.
Oh, it's totally collapsed.
It's despite 5.2% economic growth in GDP terms in 2023, China is collapsing. Real estate, all of this, China's economy is shrinking comparatively to the United States. But China has made also some major headways in high tech, has become the top car exporter around the world. So, with all of this said, Pepe, your reactions to where China is right now, especially vis-a-vis this growing build-up to war that the United States is still preparing for, despite the fact that it might not be making headlines as some of the other entanglements that the neocons find themselves in.
The Chinese don't even pay attention to it anymore, Danny. Seriously. It's fascinating. I am a part of China's writers group where some fantastic scholars contribute all the time, and some of them are wonderful. They are very witty, very sarcastic. They are all fluent in English, by the way. And they say, look, nobody cares anymore. We don't even pay attention anymore. Chinese are concentrated on this technological development, different variations of the official program which used to be called Made in China 2025, which you remember that caused Trump to have fits one after another and then impose more sanctions. And then the Chinese simply stopped talking about Made in China 2025, and they kept doing exactly the same thing that they were doing before, which is to develop 10 different areas in high tech, which they plan to be number one or at least among the top 3 by 2025, next year, in fact. Everything, artificial intelligence, quantum physics, Internet of Things, you name it. So they don't care. They kept growing last year. They have a shadow banking crisis. They have a real estate crisis. But it's going to be solved eventually. They are that summit last year of the Belt and Road Summit in Beijing. They are reactivating projects of Belt and Road. They are coordinating projects of Belt and Road with the Eurasia Economic Union as well. Something that was already said many times on the record explicitly by both Putin and Xi. And when they see what happened these last few days in the United States, And it's very easy for them to draw the conclusions. Who's on the other side? Senator Tom Cotton interviewing the head of TikTok. Have you ever been part of the Communist Party? Senator, I am a Singaporean. Have you ever been a member of the Communist Party of China? Senator, I am a Singaporean. There you go. You have to teach geography and history to the barbarians, which is my Chinese friends always say, but they will never learn history and geography. So they don't care. They don't care. They don't care. They don't care, and especially because they are focused on, and now they are also focused on BRICS. This is they see that with Russian presidency, there will be a lot of work done on BRICS as well, and they want to be part of all the major decisions as well. And the wars, from their point of view, they are far away. The wars are in barbarian lands. They have nothing to do with that. As long as it doesn't interfere too much with their commerce and trading, which in the case of the Houthis in Yemen, oh, your Chinese ships, super cool. You have free passage here. Obviously, because in this case, West Asia, part of the global South, they totally understand where China is coming from and what China is doing. So in a nutshell, Danny, it's a barbarian affair, really, from their point of view. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I want to definitely play what you referenced with Tom Cotton, perhaps because it's actually quite astounding.
It is astounding.
Because, as you said, barbarian land. I mean, this felt like something out of HUAC from the first Cold War. Just an absolute. I was shocked. I thought this video was old. I thought this was back during the initial period when
I thought
TikTok
it was
coming under investigation.
Danny, I thought it was a spoof. I watched it twice because I said, "Wow, this is a brilliant spoof." No, it's real.
It is real. All right, let's play it really quick.
You said today, as you often say, that you live in Singapore. Of what nation are you a citizen?
Singapore.
Are you a citizen of any other nation?
No, Senator.
Have you ever applied for Chinese citizenship?
Senator, I served my nation in Singapore. No, I did not.
Do you have a Singaporean passport?
Yes, and I served my military for two and a half years in Singapore.
Do you have any other passports from any other nations?
No, Senator.
Your wife is an American citizen. Your children are American citizens.
That's correct.
Have you ever applied for American citizenship?
No, not yet.
Okay. Have you ever been a member of the Chinese Communist Party?
Senator, I'm Singaporean. No.
Have you ever been associated or affiliated with the Chinese Communist Party?
No, Senator. Again, I'm Singaporean.
Let me. You said today, as you often say.
So
it's extraordinary.
He obviously hasn't read the guidelines for becoming a member of the Communist Party of China. You can't just join.
Never. Exactly. This answers all our questions, doesn't it, Danny? This is the people the Chinese are dealing with.
Exactly, and this comes also as I like to play this too. Nancy Pelosi, she has called all of those calling for a ceasefire in Gaza a part of Putin's army. And she also had a run-in with protesters. I believe these are protesters from Code Pink. She had a run-in with these protesters where she indicated that these protesters were, speaking of China, headquartered in China, that they should go back to their headquarters in China. I want to share this for you, and then you can get your reaction to this in terms of its. Here we go.
Most of your constituents want stop the genocide, stop the Holocaust.
The Democrats want the ceasefire. The Democrats want the ceasefire. The Democrats want the ceasefire.
So go back to China where your headquarters is what she said at the end. Go back to China where your headquarters is.
Is that that horrible place that has concentration camps in Xinjiang? Is that No, let's not waste our time with that, Daniel. Well,
and what you said about China not wasting their time, I mean, this is the thing about China, is that China is going about its business. And I think this
It's
is what,
business.
and maybe you can comment on the global significance, because Russia now is trading in yuan primarily as its foreign currency. And you mentioned China being, there's the great meme of, of a card where it says can pass, can't pass, and it's in terms of the Red Sea, and it's Chinese ships can pass, and of course U.S. Israeli linked ships cannot pass. Talk about the respect, because this is what many people don't know. The respect. If a nation was truly declining, as the United States says, China would not be garnering this kind of respect and influence, and be able to not only circumvent U.S. war plans, but also grow in terms of its just linkages around the world. It has been astonishing that despite the rhetoric, China has been just growing enormously in terms of its relationships and its influence around the world.
I think there's a very, very interesting cultural element to this whole process. It's as if different cultures across the global south, they are understanding the basics of the precepts of Confucianism, which is a conservative ideology essentially, but it's the basic tenets are all converging towards harmony in social relations, respect, and that includes mutual respect for the elders as well, and social stability. Basically, when you go through some of those Xi Jinping speeches, and through most of Wang Yi is saying all over the world, it's very Confucianist. And I would say that, for instance, somebody in Brazil, somebody in Nigeria, somebody in Indonesia, somebody in Malaysia, instinctively they understand that this is a civilization that wants to engage with you, the famous Xi Jinping peoples to peoples exchange, but in a mutually respected manner, and promoting social stability for everyone. And that fabulous concept that they came up with to define much of the Belt and Road projects, in fact, which is community of a shared future for mankind. Of course, when you have this discussion in Hong Kong, which I had a lot with people in Hong Kong who hate China, they say, nah, can you trust the Chinese, a community? They don't they think about their own community, shared future. They don't want to share. They want to come here and gobble up everything that you have. But this is Hong Kong. When you have this conversation across the world, people understand instinctively, no, they want to do trade with us. They are tough negotiators, of course, but they are fair. You can talk to them. You can negotiate with them. They don't interfere with what you do. They just want to do business with you, essentially. And there is an extra element, which Xi and Wang Yi are always trying to, which is this, the multipolar world we're driving towards and we're trying to shape is based on mutual respect. And especially, no culture is superior to others. So all that intrinsically is the extreme opposite of exceptionalism and the forever wars mindset. And I would say that this is a key element to drive respect towards China from, virtually every latitude, And in the case of Russia, Russia is, in terms of Russian diplomacy, which also stresses mutual respect and a new order based on equality among sovereign entities. People also instinctively understand that this is the absolute opposite to what they're living now, or they have been living for the past 75 years. So these cultural elements are, I would say, absolutely essential to when we analyze let's say, the relative success of Russia and China globally. And especially when people in all these different latitudes are comparing to what the empire has to offer, or has been offering, or has to offer, especially now at the moment where they have less than zero to offer, except setting fire to here, there, and everywhere, right?
Yeah, and maybe lastly, Pepe, China's defense
Yes.
ministry called NATO a walking war machine after at
Oh
the
man,
World
this is
Economic
brilliant.
Forum, which we didn't even get into the World Economic Forum. But the World
Yeah.
Economic Forum, NATO's Jens Stoltenberg tried to defend NATO's buildup as a counterweight in Asia, and that's been quite a we've been covering, of course, these encirclement campaigns for years. But NATO, of course, has lately, over the last few years, targeted China. But I've always wondered, Pepe, or at least I've talked about it here. I'm wondering your thoughts. What could NATO possibly do in Asia? I'm not seeing much headway, but I'm wondering, I'm just curious about NATO as an institution, so discredited for its failures in Ukraine, is now looking to expand in Asia against China. It doesn't seem like that would end well.
Danny, don't forget that NATO was in Asia. NATO got kicked out of Afghanistan. Afghanistan is a key crossroads of Central Asia and South Asia. Afghanistan is in the heartland, the historic heartland of Asia. So Mackinder would be one of the first to talk about the importance of Afghanistan. And no wonder Afghanistan was always important, because it's in the heart of the heartland for us. And we all know what happened to NATO in Afghanistan. And even worse than that, not if this humiliation in Afghanistan was not enough, now we have that piece of Norwegian wood saying that China is getting close to her. It's not NATO that is getting close to China. It's China that is threatening because they are coming close to us. So this idiot also is another one who failed geography class in Norway when he was a kid, right? What is all that? Of course, desperation, because NATO essentially, as we know, at least for the past 20, since Yugoslavia, in fact, for the past 24, 25 years, it's a global Robocop. It's why I call it at the time, when I was writing at the time about NATO, I was already defining it as a global Robocop. And I followed all those bloody NATO meetings year after year during the 2000s. All of them. I remember many of them, Lisbon, you name it, And they have been conceptualizing the global role of NATO for at least 25 years, the past 25 years. It's not going to change, of course. Whatever stupid Scandinavian they're going to have for NATO Secretary General, or even much worse. Can you imagine if we have Ursula von der Leyen as the next NATO Secretary General? She wants. So this is not going to change. This is not going to change. And of course, because the directives always come from Washington, and the real war is against China, NATO, real war, the next NATO real war is going to be against China, inevitable. But that does not mean that the war in Ukraine, they are going to forget that there is a war in Ukraine. And this is what all of us are very worried about. When you look at this 50 billion euro that was approved yesterday in Brussels, because they managed basically to blackmail Orban with this mechanism that, okay, every year we review, and depending on the results, and then the next tranche comes next year. So they approved 50 billion euros for 4 years. It's very similar to the package that crash test dummy is trying to negotiate in the US, right? In the US, it's $60 billion, if I'm not mistaken. So instead of getting the American package, they got the EU package, which is almost the same amount over 4 years, of course. And the most important thing is that most of it is loans. And these loans will have to be paid. And
Yes.
obviously, those hryvnias, those bloody hryvnias, you cannot even buy a popsicle. Can you imagine? Repay 33 billion euros that have to be repaid. 17 are grants, aid grants or whatever, you know. And it was very interesting because this week, some guys with a little bit of a brain at the French parliament, they start doing the math, and they say, oh, wait a minute. France contributes 16% of the EU budget. This is 8 billion euros. So the French taxpayers are giving 8 billion euros to country 404 instead of giving to their agricultural workers who were, as we speak, in front of the parliament in Brussels and in front of the largest wet market in the world in Rungis, outside of Paris, blocking the highways all the way to Paris, saying, look, we cannot take it anymore. And those 8 billion euros would make a lot of difference for these people. I know.
I thought Orban was behind that. Isn't that what the news stories today, over the last few days? That Orban is the puppet behind the protests all across Europe, especially France.
You mean the puppet behind the but there's no question. The protests were organized by Victor himself, Danny. Of course. Come on. You should have known that.
Imagine. I mean, it just gets more and more desperate. How you blame Viktor Orban, the mastermind behind.
Yeah, this is where we are.
This is where we are. So, yeah, I mean, the NATO expansion into Asia, it truly is desperate. Yeah, it truly is it's in the works. But you know, when it comes to what you're saying about Ukraine, there is no front that they can pull out of, and there's all this talk usually of, well, is there going to be more focus here or there? No, it seems like it's everywhere. And you mentioned von der Leyen. She does want the NATO chieftain post, and I mean, she represents everything that is wrong with the collective West foreign policy at this point. She was the one trying to escort, you call him the little Petit Roy,
Le Petit Roi?
Petit Roy in France. She tried to escort him in China last year, and hold his hand and tried to get him to basically toe the line of the US's position on
and
China.
You remember how the Chinese remember how the Chinese treated her, huh? She had to go through customs to leave. Yeah.
Had to go through customs.
Like an unwanted tourist.
And when you go to China as a tourist, right? And you know, China domestic tourism is way bigger than international tourism, but
it is
nonetheless, the vibe in China, you're not treated badly. But you know, there's a difference between if you're VIP, which, you know, politicians should be. It makes sense why there is a differentiation. But if you're just going across in an airport in China, I mean, you're just another person. It's not like there's not a lot of difference. You're not looking at the landscape and saying, wow, here's here's the luxury part of the airport, and here's the general. It doesn't work like that in China.
It doesn't work. Yes, exactly.
So when you are treated like just another person, you feel like you're just another person. Some people like that. I like that. But von der Leyen, I'm guessing.
I like that, but obviously Ursula these people are they are all entitled. Like, you know, the clip that you showed of Pelosi is the archetype of an entitled person who, and obviously when she's confronted with a different opinion, they lose it completely, or they don't have any sound argument or counter argument.
No, it's Russia, China, China. You want a ceasefire in Gaza? Well, you must be Vladimir Putin's puppets. You want a ceasefire in Gaza? You must be headquartered in China. That's their position. Meanwhile, 80% of the planet wants peace in Gaza, wants the slaughter to stop. Pepe, I've kept you quite a long time. Do you have any closing
Thank you.
remarks about anything, this topic, anything else that you'd like to say before I let you go?
Yes. Look, next time we talk, I'm sure I'm going to have a lot of inside news for all of you from Russia, definitely, including progress within the BRICS, progression on the de-dollarization front. Maybe if we talk after the before or after the Russian elections, a few extra tidbits about how these elections are important in terms of the continuity. From a Chinese point of view, it's that they expect Putin to remain in power because not only the strategic relationship, but there's the personal relationship between both, which is quite something, and they discuss everything that is important on the phone. They talk to each other practically every week, which is quite amazing. It's not only Lavrov and Wang Yi, it's up there all the time. So this is going to be very, very, very important. And I'm going to have maybe a surprise for you next time we talk. And I cannot say what for the moment. So,
all right. Well, yeah, I mean, yes, definitely reach out whenever the surprise is ready, and I'll definitely schedule a time to have you back on. Pepe, it's a pleasure as always. Everyone, go to the video description, find Pepe's Telegram, find his Twitter, make sure you're following all of his work, supporting him. Take care, Pepe, and I'll talk to you very soon.
Take care, Danny. Thanks, everybody. And, as we used to say way back during the Cuba and post-Pinochet years, la lucha continúa.
All righty, Pepe.
All right, bye-bye. Cheers, bye. Take care.
So that was a great talk. I just have a few announcements, and then I am heading out of here myself to the weekend. I hope all of you are having a good start to your weekend. A few announcements, okay? So first, I am going through a little bit of a difficult time. I have been doxxed. You may know what that is. The Zionists are trying to silence me. That won't happen, of course, but I'm not going to go into the details of it because it has to do with my employer, and I'm not comfortable sharing the details just yet until things settle down. But let's just say stress levels have been high the last 2 days, but nothing is going to change here. I'm going to keep going. Doxing does not intimidate me. And so that is happening. It is a bit of a stressful period. So just FYI, if you notice anything changes here, any kind of slowness here, I don't think it's going to slow down too much here on this channel, even though we do have an end of the month commitment. It all depends on where I feel like I'm progressing. But I have been doxxed. It's incredibly pathetic on the part. And for those who don't know what doxing is, it just means putting out personal information that you had wished to keep private. That opening up the floodgates of like intimidation and things like that from Zionists, which is happening. So with all of that said, the best way, this is really, that's why I am trying to transition more into this kind as more full-time work. With that said, you can support this channel in the video description on Patreon, Substack, YouTube, PayPal, and Buy Me a Coffee. You can find all of those links in the video description. Of course, the link to YouTube is on the YouTube channel. The join button right by my video, my channel title, my channel name. Patreon is the best way to support, but of course, all those other options are great. Many different perks, including asking questions of me, of Pepe, of guests like him that I have on regularly. You can also do the one-time options or the other options, which all come with similar perks if you so choose to, to ask a request or suggest a guest or question to the guest. All of that can be available on the other platforms, but Patreon is the best place. That's where I have the biggest community. Substack is also a great option. PayPal, Buy Me a Coffee, all of that good stuff. That all goes a long way in ensuring that there is support. Should the censors, should all of these, these forces sometimes are successful. My channel is still here, luckily, knock on wood. But, all of these things are very important. With that said, everyone, I want to say hello to Rumble, to Rockfin folks. Thanks so much for supporting alternative media. I do want to just pull up Rumble really quickly. Rockfin, no disrespect. I love the Rockfin community. But I want to just show you, here is my Rumble channel. It is in the video chat. You want to go there and subscribe on Rumble just so you can follow me there in case anything goes awry here. And of course, you want to support this channel, and the links in the video description. Unfortunately, Rumble folks, there are no links in your video description right now. I had to get yours up. Same with Rockfin. But if you go to my YouTube channel, please do check out the links on my YouTube channel. All right, everybody, subscribe on Rumble, all that good stuff. I'm going to give shout outs. So first, shout out to all the Patreon members, Substack members, YouTube members that have shown up today. I know that it is early, but it is a reasonable time in most other parts of the world. So I appreciate all of you. I want to shout out to all the moderators. I see Desert Rantis. I saw Ware Pilgrim. I saw Connie Reed. Thank you so much for all of your help. It is very much appreciated. Not sure if there are any other moderators. Now, with that said, let me get to the super chats, and then I'll head out of here. All right. Carpe Diem says, please donate to UNRWA. Yeah. So please, the UN organization responsible for aid to Gaza has been sanctioned by the United States over bogus claims of so-called quote unquote, terrorist support. You want to support UNRWA because this is, of course, another aspect of this brutal genocide. So please support UNRWA. Carpe Diem, thanks so much for the super chat. Claire Gillies, thanks so much, Claire, for your generous donation. Sparky, thank you so much for coming. We also have Sparky again. Go Yemen, fight the power. I agree. We have Sparky again. Thanks for being generous. Build a better world with bricks. I agree. And denazify Israel. Yeah, you might have to change the whole calculus of what Israel even means. So thanks, Sparky. And then one more from Sparky. We have one report I heard said the drone which killed U.S. soldiers followed a returning U.S. drone in while defenses were on standby to make way for that returning U.S. drone. Very possible. I mean, the United States was obviously not prepared for this. They tried to claim it was the United States against the United States, like they made an error and it was their fault. And it's come out since that actually this was an act of resistance, and the United States has felt so compelled to react because their standing in this region is becoming more, not only lower, but it's becoming embarrassing. The United States has lost all control over its influence and diktats and ability to assert real power in this region. And so it is very desperate. And that's why we have the situation that we have. Bernardo said, hi, Danny, please ask Pepe, what is the impact of the actions on the derivative industry and why it impacts? Thanks so much. Thank you so much from the UK. Unfortunately, I did not get to this question with Pepe, but apologies. I really appreciate it. We have a very generous gift from Zozoto Lewin, a member themselves, and have gifted 5 memberships. So thank you so much. And for those 5 members, if you can, please do stick around. If you can't, consider supporting the channel in other ways. We have Guta Hagardi as a new member. Thanks so much. Welcome, Guta. Welcome. We have Toby, The World Teacher for All Humanity by Benjamin Cream, free esoteric ebook. Okay, yes. Toby, I think you've been here before. So, yes, please do look that work up. Keith Alcock, good work, Stanley. We love you, man. Cheers from Canada. Hey, right back at you. Appreciate it. And then we have Katie. Katie Miggs. I hope I didn't butcher your name, but your super chat is very much appreciated from where I am. So with all that said, let's see if we have any Rumble comments worth looking into. People give me some suggestions here on Rumble. Let's see. We have a couple comments about NATO from Chatter. Okay, well, thanks so much for your support. Thank you so much, everyone on Rockfin. All right, everybody. So the next stream is kind of up in the air. It may depend on whether I can get a guest. It maybe Mark Sloboda on Wednesday. It may be another stream on Thursday, the 8th. So the 7th and 8th, look out. I believe I have confirmed Mark Sloboda for the 7th. That should be fun. That would be like 12 noon Eastern time. Okay. But there'll be some flexibility with that. But just save the date, 7th and 8th. I should be back around here. With all that said, take good care. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Thanks so much for all your support. It is very much appreciated. This work could not be, it could not be done without all of you. So please do, before you go, okay? Before you go, hit the like button if you have not already. All right, on all the platforms, but especially YouTube. If you have the time, subscribe to the channel. Well, if I have just do it. It takes a second. Subscribe, hit the notifications bell so you know when I go live. And then, of course, go to the video description and find all the ways you can follow Pepe Escobar. But also, you can find all the ways to support me. Patreon being the best. Substack, YouTube, buy me a coffee, PayPal. All of those options are on the table where you can support. And lastly, I'm in the works of going back to China in April. It's not necessarily 100% confirmed yet, but that is the plan. And Lord, do I need to travel again, because I am, let's just say I'm kind of up to here with dealing with things in the US of A. So, well, thank you so much. I see some people suggesting that I should talk to Russell Brand. I mean, I would love to be on Russell's show. Anything to support the work. But yeah, trying to go back to China, April. Stay tuned. I'll give you more details on that. And I will definitely do more video vlogging, all that good stuff, like I did in Vietnam from China. And that'll be some fun. That would be some fun. That would be really fun. That's gonna be great. So with all that said, to be continued. I'll be back. I'll be updating as I get news and as streams come rolling around. But I appreciate everything. Take care. Have a great weekend if you're able to have a great weekend, if that means anything to you. But have a great rest of your day, night, evening, rest, all of it. I appreciate everything that you all have done to keep this work going, and we're going to keep going. So I'll be back with all of you soon. See you next week. Bye-bye.